Kindness has a way of coming back to us, often in ways we least expect. This is the story of John, a humble black man living in a small southern town, whose simple act of compassion would one day come full circle, changing not only his life but the lives of everyone around him. Nestled among rolling hills and winding dirt roads, this quiet little town is one where time seems to have slowed down. On the surface, it appears idyllic, a place where neighbors greet each other with smiles and kids ride bikes down tree-lined streets. But beneath this tranquil facade, subtle divisions linger. Old prejudices and unspoken biases simmer quietly, rarely erupting but always present, shaping interactions and relationships. In the heart of this town sits John's Diner, a cozy establishment known for its warm meals and even warmer atmosphere. The diner is small, just a handful of booths and a counter with spinning stools. But it's the kind of place where the coffee is always fresh, and the conversations flow as freely as the laughter. It's John's pride and joy, a testament to years of hard work and perseverance. John himself is as much a fixture of the town as his diner. Middle-aged, with a kind smile and an unassuming demeanor, he's the type of person who makes everyone feel at home. Whether it's a free meal for someone down on their luck or a listening ear for a troubled customer, John has built a reputation for his generosity and compassion. People often say, if you're in trouble, go to John. He'll find a way to help. But John doesn't do it for recognition or thanks. For him, kindness is a way of life, a principle deeply ingrained in his heart. Little did he know, one rainy evening his unwavering kindness would set off a chain of events he could never have imagined. The rain poured down relentlessly that night, hammering the pavement and bouncing off the tin roof of John's diner. The neon sign outside flickered against the downpour, casting a warm, inviting glow onto the wet street. Inside, the diner was quiet. A couple of regulars chatting over coffee and the faint hum of a radio playing a classic tune in the background. As John wiped down the counter, he glanced out the window and spotted a figure huddled near the diner's entrance. A teenage boy stood there, shivering under the awning, drenched from head to toe. His oversized hoodie clung to him, soaked through, and his sneakers squelched with every step he took in place, as if debating whether to come in. John frowned, setting the towel aside. He opened the door, the bell jingling softly, and called out, his voice warm and steady. "Hey there, son. You look like you've been through the ringer. Come on in before you catch your death out here." The boy hesitated, his eyes darting away like a skittish deer. But John didn't press him. Instead, he stepped aside, holding the door open as if the decision was entirely Jake's. After a moment of hesitation, the boy shuffled in, his head bowed, water dripping from his clothes onto the linoleum floor. "Don't worry about the mess," John said with a chuckle, grabbing a towel from behind the counter. "If I yelled at everyone who tracked in a little rain, I'd have no customers left." Jake managed a faint smile, though he still looked wary. John handed him the towel and gestured to a booth near the heater. "Sit yourself down. I'll grab you something hot to eat. Sound good?" "Yeah, thanks," Jake mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. As Jake dried off, John returned with a steaming bowl of chicken soup and a thick slice of buttered bread. "Here you go. This'll put some color back in your cheeks, and don't worry, it's not as bad as it looks. My cooking's only scary if you order the meatloaf." Jake gave a surprised laugh, a sound that seemed foreign even to him. He dipped the bread into the soup and took a cautious bite, his guard still up, but lowering with every mouthful. "Rain's a real party crasher, huh?" John said, sitting across from him with a mug of coffee. "I swear this town gets more water than we know what to do with. At least it keeps the plants happy." Jake cracked a small smile but stayed quiet, focusing on his food. After a while, though, he glanced up and muttered, I ran away. From home." John nodded thoughtfully, not looking shocked or judgmental. Tough night, huh? I've had a few of those myself. Jake looked at him, uncertain whether to trust this stranger. But something about John's calm, non-intrusive demeanor made him open up, if only a little. My dad, he doesn't listen. He just yells. And my mom, she tries, but it's like she's scared of him. John leaned back, studying the boy for a moment. You know, he said softly, when I was about your age, I had my fair share of fights at home, too. One time I got so mad I grabbed my stuff and left. Thought I'd figure it all out on my own. Jake looked up, intrigued. What happened? John chuckled. Made it about 3 blocks before the neighbor's dog chased me back home. Worst runaway attempt in history. His tone turned more serious. But I learned something that day. Sometimes running doesn't solve much. Doesn't mean you're wrong to feel how you do, just means there's a better way to handle it. Jake nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time. For the first time in a while, he felt heard. Not judged, not dismissed, just understood. And as the rain kept falling outside, a quiet bond began to form between the two. Jake sat in the warmth of John's diner, staring into the empty bowl of soup as if searching for answers. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of safety, a reprieve from the chaos that seemed to define his life. After a moment of silence, he began to speak, his voice low and hesitant, like he wasn't used to someone actually listening. My dad. He's not like you, Jake said, avoiding John's gaze. He doesn't talk. Not really. He just shouts when something's wrong, and it feels like everything I do is wrong. John nodded quietly, sipping his coffee. He didn't interrupt, letting Jake find his words. I try, you know, Jake continued, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I try to be good, to stay out of trouble. But it's like, no matter what I do, it's never enough. He's always mad about something, the way I dress, my grades, how I spend my time. And my mom, she tries to keep the peace, but all she does is agree with him. Jake's voice cracked slightly, and he quickly looked down, embarrassed. She never sticks up for me, not once. It's like, I don't matter. John leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. That's a hard thing to carry, feeling like no one's on your side. But it's not true, you know. Just 'cause someone doesn't show it the way you want doesn't mean they don't care. Jake shook his head. You don't know my dad. He doesn't care about anyone except himself. John didn't argue, but his expression remained thoughtful. Sometimes people care in ways they don't know how to show. Doesn't make it right, but it doesn't mean you're worthless either. You've got value, Jake. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Jake looked up, his guarded expression softening. He wasn't used to hearing things like that. At home, he was the problem to be fixed, the kid who couldn't measure up. At school, things weren't much better. They don't get me there either, Jake admitted, shifting uncomfortably. The other kids, they act like I'm invisible, except when they want to mess with me. My clothes aren't cool enough, my hair's too messy, and, well, let's just say I'm not exactly popular. John gave him a reassuring smile. I hear you. School can be rough, but you know, people who spend all their time tearing others down usually have their own problems. They just hide them by trying to make someone else feel small. Jake thought about that, the weight of John's words settling in his chest. No one had ever explained it like that before. Over the next hour, their conversation deepened. John shared stories from his own youth, how he'd faced his own challenges growing up, including the doubts and struggles that came with being a black man in a world that didn't always treat him kindly. You don't solve anything by running, John said gently. Problems don't disappear when you leave them behind. They just follow you. But you're stronger than you think, Jake. You've got what it takes to face whatever's waiting for you back home. Jake wasn't sure he believed it yet, but something about John's steady conviction made him want to try. For the first time, he felt like someone truly saw him, not as a failure, not as a burden, but as someone worth believing in. And that small spark of hope was enough to keep him going, at least for now. When Jake finally returned home, it was late, and the rain had subsided into a faint drizzle. His mother, Ellen, was pacing near the living room window, worry etched across her face. As soon as she saw him, relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by frustration. "Jake, where have you been?" she demanded, rushing over to him. "You had me worried sick." Before Jake could answer, his father, Frank, appeared in the doorway. His stern face, furrowed brows, and crossed arms made it clear he wasn't in a forgiving mood. "You've got some nerve coming back this late," Frank said coldly. "What were you thinking?" Jake hesitated, but then, emboldened by the kindness he'd just experienced, he decided to tell the truth. "I was at a diner," he said, his voice steady. "There's this man, John. He saw me out in the rain, soaked and freezing. He gave me food, let me dry off. He was kind." Frank's expression darkened instantly, his jaw tightening. "John? And who is this John?" Jake swallowed. "He runs the diner downtown. A black man?" Frank interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You let a stranger, one of them, help you? Are you out of your mind?" Ellen flinched at her husband's tone. "Frank, don't what, Ellen?" Frank snapped, his voice rising. "He has no business hanging around people like that. You don't know what kind of trouble you've walked into, Jake." Jake clenched his fists, anger flaring in his chest. "Trouble? He was the only one who cared. He didn't ask for anything. He just helped me because I needed it. Why is that so hard for you to understand?" Frank's face turned red, his frustration bubbling over. "Because people like him don't just do things out of the goodness of their hearts, Jake. They always want something." Jake shook his head, disbelief clouding his expression. "You're wrong. You don't even know him." The argument escalated, but Jake stormed off to his room before it could go further, slamming the door behind him. Ellen looked at Frank, a mix of sadness and disappointment in her eyes, but she said nothing. The next day, still stewing in his anger, Frank decided to see this John for himself. He walked into the diner, the bell above the door jingling sharply. The patrons, mostly regulars enjoying their coffee and breakfast, looked up briefly but quickly returned to their conversations. John, standing behind the counter, smiled warmly. "Morning, sir. Can I get you something?" John asked, his tone polite and welcoming. Frank ignored the pleasantries, stepping forward with his arms crossed. "Are you John?" John nodded, unfazed by Frank's confrontational posture. "That'd be me. What can I do for you?" "My son was here last night," Frank said, his voice hard. "He told me you helped him out." John nodded again, his smile softening. "That's right. Poor kid looked like he needed a warm meal and a dry place to sit. I was happy to help." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Why? What do you want from him?" John paused, the question hanging heavily in the air. Then he sighed, wiping his hands on a towel before leaning slightly against the counter. "Nothing," he said simply. "Your boy looked like he needed help, so I helped him. That's all there is to it," Frank scoffed. "Nobody does something for nothing." John met his gaze calmly. "Maybe you haven't met the right people yet." The tension in the room was palpable. The regulars exchanged uneasy glances, whispering amongst themselves. Some were surprised by Frank's tone, but others nodded in quiet agreement, their own prejudices lurking beneath the surface. But John didn't rise to the bait. He stayed calm, his voice steady and respectful. "I'm sorry if my actions upset you," he said, "but I don't regret helping your son. He's a good kid. Just seemed like he needed someone to be there for him." Frank opened his mouth to retort, but something in John's tone gave him pause. It wasn't just the words, it was the quiet dignity behind them, a strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. After a long silence, Frank muttered, "We'll see about that," and walked out. In the days that followed, word of the confrontation spread through the town. Some people supported Frank, saying he was just looking out for his family. Others quietly admired John for his composure and kindness, even in the face of hostility. The diner remained a haven for those who knew and trusted John, but whispers grew louder in certain corners of the town. Prejudices that had lain dormant began to surface, as if Frank's visit had given them permission to rise. But John never let it change him. He continued to greet every customer with a smile, to serve every meal with the same care, and to treat everyone, regardless of how they treated him, with unwavering kindness. Slowly but surely, a few began to notice. It was a small shift, barely perceptible at first, but it was there. A quiet admiration for the man who refused to let hate define him. A few months passed, and life in the small town continued as usual. John kept running his diner with the same warmth and kindness, serving up plates of comfort food and lending an ear to anyone who needed it. But beneath his ever-present smile, John was struggling. Business had slowed down. A new fast food chain had opened just outside town, drawing away customers who valued convenience over quality. To make matters worse, a recent storm had damaged the roof of the diner, and repairs were costly. John had dipped into his savings to keep things afloat, but the bills were piling up. The diner, his pride and joy, was at risk of shutting down. John never voiced his troubles to his customers, not wanting to burden anyone. But the cracks were beginning to show. The coffee machine broke down one morning, leaving John apologizing to customers while trying to fix it himself. Supplies grew scarce, with John stretching his limited resources to keep the menu intact. Despite his best efforts, the once bustling diner now felt eerily quiet. Jake had noticed the changes. He still visited John's diner regularly, finding it a safe space amidst the chaos of his teenage life. But lately, he'd seen the worry lines etched deeper into John's face, the subtle but telling signs that something was wrong. One evening, as Jake lingered after closing time, he finally worked up the courage to ask, "John, are you okay? You've been looking tired." John paused, wiping down the counter. For a moment, he considered brushing it off with his usual good-natured humor, but something about Jake's earnest expression made him stop. "Times are tough, Jake," John admitted with a small, weary smile. "The diner's been struggling. Nothing I can't handle, though." Jake frowned. "But what if you can't? You've done so much for this town. Don't they know that?" John shrugged. "People have their own lives, their own struggles. Can't expect them to fix mine." His tone was calm, accepting. "I'll figure it out. I always do." But Jake couldn't shake the frustration bubbling inside him. He thought about how John had helped him without hesitation, how he'd offered kindness without expecting anything in return. Now, seeing John face his own struggles alone, Jake felt a surge of determination. He couldn't just stand by. The next morning, Jake sprang into action. He started by rallying his classmates and friends, telling them about John's plight. "This guy helped me when I had nowhere to go," Jake said passionately. "He's done more for this town than half the people who live here. We can't just let him lose his diner." Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. His friends agreed to help spread the word, posting on social media and putting up flyers around town. "Save John's Diner" became their rallying cry, and soon word began to spread. Jake didn't stop there. He approached his parents, starting with his mother. Ellen was hesitant at first, worried about how Frank would react, but Jake's determination softened her. "All right," she said finally. "I'll talk to your father, but don't get your hopes up." To everyone's surprise, Frank didn't outright refuse. While he still carried his reservations about John, even he couldn't deny the man's character. "If you're going to do this, do it right," Frank said gruffly, handing Jake a check. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a difference. As the community began to rally, donations poured in, some small, others generous. The high school organized a car wash, local musicians held a benefit concert, and businesses chipped in with supplies and labor for repairs. Jake led every effort, his confidence growing with each success. John was stunned when he learned what was happening. He walked out of the diner one morning to find a crowd of volunteers ready to fix the roof, clean up the diner, and lend a hand wherever needed. Tears welled in his eyes as Jake stepped forward, grinning proudly. "You helped me when I needed it," Jake said simply. "Now it's my turn." John's voice caught in his throat as he tried to respond. All he could do was pull Jake into a hug, his heart overflowing with gratitude. The diner was saved, but more than that, it became a symbol of what kindness could achieve. Jake's efforts had brought the town together in a way no one thought possible. For the first time, people saw John not just as a man running a diner, but as a pillar of their community, someone who made their lives a little brighter every day. And for Jake, it was more than just repaying a debt. It was a lesson in courage, compassion, and the power of doing what's right, even when it's not easy. Jake sat at his desk, staring at his laptop with determination. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he crafted the perfect social media post. "Let's save John's Diner," he typed, accompanied by a photo of the cozy diner glowing in the soft light of sunset. Beneath it, he wrote a heartfelt caption. "John has been there for so many of us. He's served us meals, listened to our problems, and shown kindness when we needed it most. Now it's time for us to show up for him. Join us for a fundraiser this Saturday to help save the diner that's more than just a place to eat. It's the heart of our community." Jake hit post, feeling a nervous flutter in his stomach. Would anyone show up? Would people care as much as he did? Over the next few days, Jake threw himself into planning the fundraiser with an energy that surprised even him. He created flyers, contacted local businesses for donations, and enlisted his friends to help spread the word. His sincerity struck a chord with those around him, but planning wasn't without its challenges. At one point, while attempting to set up a donation box at school, Jake accidentally dropped the cash-filled container, scattering coins across the hallway. "Guess I'm not in charge of the money," he muttered sheepishly, earning laughs from his classmates. Another time, he tried to convince a local bakery to donate cupcakes, only to stammer awkwardly when asked how many he needed. A lot. Enough to feed, like, a town?" Despite these mishaps, Jake's passion was undeniable, and people began to take notice. The fundraiser was shaping up to be a major event. The most surprising moment came when Jake approached his father for support. Frank, usually stern and resistant, leaned back in his chair and listened as Jake spoke passionately about John. "Dad, I know you don't think much of him, but John's a good man. He didn't have to help me that night, but he did. And I'm not going to stand by and let him lose everything just because the town doesn't care enough to step up." Frank sat in silence for a moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "All right," he said, pulling out his checkbook. "You tell John I'm doing this for you, not for him." It wasn't a complete change of heart, but it was a step forward, a crack in the wall Frank had built around himself. The day of the fundraiser arrived, and the diner was buzzing with activity. Tables were set up outside, decorated with balloons and homemade signs that read, "Save John's Diner." Volunteers served baked goods, kids sold lemonade, and a local band played cheerful tunes. Jake darted from table to table, juggling tasks and trying to keep everything running smoothly. At one point, he tripped over a loose extension cord, spilling lemonade on himself. Instead of being embarrassed, he laughed it off, his energy infecting everyone around him. Slowly but surely, the townsfolk began to arrive. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine affection for John. Families donated what they could, neighbors exchanged smiles, and the atmosphere grew warmer with every passing moment. The highlight of the day came when Frank arrived, standing stiffly at the edge of the crowd. Spotting John, he walked over and extended a hand. "I owe you an apology," Frank said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You helped my boy when I didn't, and, well, I was wrong about you." John smiled, shaking Frank's hand. "It takes a big man to admit when he's wrong. I appreciate it." The moment was simple, but powerful. The crowd fell silent, watching as two men who couldn't have been more different found common ground in mutual respect. By the end of the day, the fundraiser had exceeded everyone's expectations. The diner had raised enough money not only to cover its debts, but also to repair the damage and keep its doors open. As Jake stood beside John, watching the crowd disperse, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment he'd never experienced before. "You did good, kid," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. Jake grinned. "I learned from the best." The event had done more than save the diner. It had brought the town together, showing them the power of community and the ripple effect of one man's kindness. The morning of the grand reopening of John's diner was bright and clear, the sun casting a golden glow over the freshly painted sign above the door. A line of people stretched around the block, the hum of anticipation filling the air. Families, neighbors, and friends had all come out to celebrate, eager to be part of this special day. Inside, the diner gleamed with a renewed warmth. The new roof was sturdy, the counters polished, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon wafted through the air. The changes weren't just physical. The diner now held an energy of unity and gratitude, a testament to the community's collective effort to save it. John stood behind the counter, his heart swelling as he watched familiar faces pour in. He shook hands, exchanged hugs, and thanked everyone who had helped him in his time of need. But the most touching moment came when Jake walked through the door, a proud smile lighting up his face. Jake approached the counter, and for a moment, the bustling diner seemed to fade into the background. "I guess this place looks a little different, huh?" Jake said, glancing around. John chuckled. "Just a little. I'd say it's got more character now, though." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Jake spoke again, his voice softer. "John, I wanted to say thank you. Not just for that night in the rain, but for everything. You were the first person who really believed in me, who made me feel like I mattered." John's eyes softened and he reached out to clasp Jake's shoulder. "You've always mattered, Jake. You just needed a little reminder. And you've done more for this town, and me, than I ever could have asked for." Jake smiled, his chest swelling with a sense of pride and belonging. "Well, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. You taught me better than that." John grinned, his trademark humor kicking in. "Next time, just pay me back with better tips. It'll save us both a lot of trouble." They both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of the past few months lifted entirely. Around them, the diner buzzed with life, the sound of clinking plates, cheerful conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter filling the space. It wasn't just a diner anymore. It was a symbol of what kindness and determination could achieve. As the day wound down and the last customers trickled out, John stood at the door, looking out at the sunset. The voiceover began, gentle and reflective. "Kindness doesn't just change the one who receives it. It transforms entire communities. It's a spark, a ripple, a seed that grows into something bigger than we ever imagined. In a world full of struggles and heartache, we all have the power to be the John in someone's life, to lend a hand, to offer a smile, to make someone feel seen and valued. Because when we choose kindness, we don't just make the world better for someone else. We make it better for ourselves, too." With that, the screen faded to black, the warm glow of John's Diner sign lingering in view, a beacon of hope and unity in the heart of a small town.